And now we're going to move on to another strong woman, Congresswoman Madeleine Dean. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So, you know, and Judge Orleo, you should stay on just for 1 second, because Madeleine was to the dear Congresswoman. And when you look at Congresswoman's background and her family, oh, and I also want to thank Regina Thomas, my dear friend, for her notes and the support for Reverend Regina Thomas, everything she does for women. But you know, one of the great things, my dear friend Judge Orleo said, you know, Congresswoman Dean has done so much on the political stage, but I guess Madeleine had seen you, Congresswoman, speak about the book Under a Roof, A Son's Battle for Recovery, A Mother's Battle for Her Son, and then the children's book is so incredibly powerful. You were always loved, A Story of Hope. And so, you know, the woman we're just talking about, you know, the struggle with addiction, with domestic violence, with sexual abuse, in their lives. But the focus of our conference this year is From Trauma to Triumph. And 78% of our clients suffer from addiction. We have probably 1,200 persons in MAT, 6,000 persons in some type of addiction treatment, whether it's detox, residential, IOP, or medication-assisted treatment. About 40% of our clients suffering from opioid use disorder. So there's a addiction, incarceration, and the importance. So it's just a really great honor. And I'm always touched. If for those of you who want to look to the Congresswoman's personal story, her faith, what motivates her, Reverend Al and Governor Christie talked about values, talked about moral courage. Here's somebody who has real moral courage, for she as well as her son. And I'm just really honored. You know, she's vaulted in so many circles, but the thing that has touched us so deeply, all of us in terms of New Jersey Reentry, is her remarks on addiction and the possibility of second chances and triumph. And with that, it's a great honor to call upon Congresswoman. She happens to be from the wrong side of the river or the right side of the river, Congresswoman Dean. Thank you for joining us.
Oh my goodness, it is my extraordinary honor, Governor McCreevy. I have to note the photograph behind you, my hero, Bobby Kennedy, who focused on the poor and the vulnerable and the marginalized. So I'm not surprised that he dons your office. Governor McCreevy and New Jersey Reentry Corporation, thank you for including me today. I've been looking over your program, and I just had the chance to listen into the last group of panelists. I don't know how I made it to this program, to be really honest, but I'm excited to be here. And I do bring my personal self to this and our personal story. So thank you for lifting up the story of my son. I'll talk a little bit about what we've learned along the way.
Yeah, thank you.
And how it intersects, frankly, with the very things you're talking about. But thank you to NJRC for your help with formerly incarcerated people and getting them to successfully return to society. It's admirable and it inspires me. I do want you to know that. By way of introduction, yes, I'm a second-term Congresswoman from the other side of the river. I serve Montgomery and Berks County, suburban Philadelphia, and I'm the mother of 3 sons, one of whom you're going to hear about. But I was also a state representative prior to that. I was a professor at LaSalle University in Philadelphia prior to that, and I was also a practicing attorney. And the intersection of all 3 of those career paths is about advocating for those who cannot sometimes advocate for themselves. And so know that that's the spirit with which I take my service in Congress. I bring to it a personal case because my son Harry is right now 8 years and 5 months in long-term recovery from opioid addiction. And as the governor pointed out, we recently released a book. It's a dueling story of our struggles. me trying to figure out what was wrong with him, drug testing him, him lying, manipulating, deceiving as he slipped farther and farther and farther into the disease of addiction until we figured it out and confronted him and blessedly said yes to help. My son is white. My son has no record, no criminal record. We are not in the dark about that. While the disease of addiction didn't know any color or race or socioeconomic barrier, certainly we know that society sees those who suffer from the disease of addiction differently, and our criminal justice system differently and wrongly, just flat out wrongly. So that's the premise from which I begin my talk. And I will say the theme of my talk is there is wisdom won through pain. That's a famous Aeschylus line. We had so much.
As you know, that was Robert Kennedy's line on the back of a truck the night Dr. King was assassinated.
Yes, he quoted his favorite poet, Aeschylus, exactly.
Here's Madeleine. So this was, so just so you know, Judge Arlo is a federal district court judge. Judge Arlo called me and she said, "You have to get this Congresswoman, she's tremendous." So you have fans in New Jersey.
That's pretty wild. That's really nice. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you for being here.
I'm surprised. Should I continue? Is that
no, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I apologize.
No, I want to make sure because I don't want to interrupt the flow here. My son wound up volunteering. As I said, he had no record, but he volunteered at a prison in Philadelphia when he was about 2 years into recovery, 3 years into recovery. He worked with prisoners and talked with them through NA meetings. This little white kid, frankly, with no record. And as he walked through those clanking gates, both he and I knew it was a prison that could have been his own. And for other reasons, it wasn't. So just 3 portions of my talk that I thought I would weave in here today are what we know, some of the things we know, and I know you have already discussed many of these crazy, sad statistics on the mental health crisis in prisons. Number 2, legislation that I'm a part of, the Crisis Stabilization and Community Reentry Act of 2020. And number 3, something I've had the honor to introduce with the late Elijah Cummings, the PrEP Act. So mental health crisis in our prisons and where I meet some of it. I had the chance as a state representative to visit Muncie Prison for Women in Pennsylvania. It is a very sad place with many women lifers who spent decades in that prison, who want nothing more than to not die in that prison. We've got to do better. But we also noted and were able to ask questions about mental health and the intersection of mental health and incarceration. I walked down hallways, cells of women, individuals in cells screaming out in mental anguish. Something's wrong when that is the state of our carceral system. The mental health crisis in our prisons we know is worse than ever. A recent survey by the Pennsylvania Prison Society reports that nearly 2/3 of persons serving time currently are getting less than an hour a day out of the prisons, out of their cell. Making matters worse, of course, the pandemic, outdoor time, counseling services, visitation, activities that can all stem in some ways the psychological trauma of lockdown have been all but non-existent in most facilities. Women incarcerated in Philadelphia prisons report that programming of all kinds has been halted for the last year. Before the pandemic, approximately 20% of inmates in jails and 15% of inmates in state prisons were estimated to have serious mental illness and many substance abuse disorder. The numbers are even likely higher now. Other facts that we know, in a mental health crisis, people are more likely to encounter police than get medical care. Walter Wallace was shot dead in Philadelphia last year. Police responded to the scene. In a civilized society, that's not how that's supposed to go, and that's not how that's supposed to end. As a result, 2 million people with mental illness are booked into jails each year, nearly 15% of men, and a shocking 30% of women have serious mental health conditions. As I said, I visited Muncie State Prison. I visited prisons in Philadelphia because, as Brian Stevenson says, you have to get proximate if you want to understand a problem and do something about it. Tragically, the number of suicides in Pennsylvania prisons in 2019 was at its highest in our memory, at a rate of 42 deaths per 100,000 people, the highest it had been in 25 years. And as you know so well, after leaving jail, many no longer have access, if they had it at all, to needed health care and benefits, making it harder for them to get a job, to get housing, to get a stable life. Many, especially without access to mental health services and supports, wind up homeless, in emergency rooms, or reincarcerated. Jailing people with mental illness and or substance abuse disorder creates more problems and does not protect the public. These people who need help are being ignored, which brings me to my second point. I have been just delighted to be a partner on the Crisis Stabilization and Community Reentry Act. I work with Representative Trone, Rutherford, Rushenthaler, Scanlon, Armstrong, and Senators Cornyn and Blumenthal. As you can see, a bipartisan bill. It would authorize grant money for law enforcement in order to partner with mental health providers to provide support for mental health services for incarcerated people and for those returning to society, partnering both the mental health system and law enforcement. We have to re-envision how we treat people with mental illness. I'm dedicated to increasing awareness around the mental health toll and what it takes on our communities, and to bring into mainstream medicine mental health services, to bring it out of the stigma, to bring it out of shame, along with ending stigma on substance abuse and addiction. And third,
a little bit about the importance of that bill, because, you know, for so many of our clients, upwards of 40% co-occurring mental illness, and then, you know, mid-70s, even higher addiction. I mean, part of the reality is, and for the police, it's also a challenge that traditionally, the county jail was the largest provider of mental health, and it's sometimes actually addiction treatment. Could you talk about how your legislation and will coordinate the interrelationship between and policing to provide a better outcome than the criminal justice system?
Yeah, absolutely. It's number one, the very thing you just pointed out, which is a recognition of these coexisting disorders, and that the carceral system isn't the way to go about it, whether while the person is incarcerated or as they come into re-entry. And so it's about resources. This would drive grant monies to
Police departments. Yep.
to police departments to say, we've got to do this better in order to connect people to the desperate mental health
services. Because that's what, I mean, we just see that, you know, whether somebody's having a challenge, or it's an episodic concern, or it's addiction, or it's a withdrawal, that the answer isn't the criminal justice system. And the answer is, you know, appropriate treatment, whether it's mental health or addiction. So I'm just very grateful for your legislation, because it for a lot of our clients, I mean, Congresswoman, it's tough when they're on parole or probation, and this happens, and they get reintroduced, whether to the county jail, and they can violate parole or violate probation. And it's because of what I would argue, a health issue as opposed to a criminogenic issue. And then it's like all the work you've done to get them an apartment, to get them a job, healthy relationship, addiction treatment, it just goes in a flash, when really what it needs is a little patience and a more appropriate setting, if you will.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to that, you know, as a result of writing this book, people are writing to us, to my son and to me from across the country, a young woman wrote to me that her mother, who struggles with substance abuse disorder, has been in the criminal justice system, in and out and in and out and in and out, and is in right now in a Western state with no treatment for substance abuse disorder. And how is that person to get better? How is that person to recover and come back into society? So that's why to drive grant programs to law enforcement, police departments, and to our Bureau of Prisons to get people treatment. And once they're out, to get them the treatment they need, the continuing treatment. We know the barriers in a pandemic and the number of people who are not involved in the carceral system, who are struggling to keep themselves in treatment and in recovery. I thought I would add one last piece, which is the PrEP Act, and then I'd wrap it up and get out of your hair. I'm very honored. I had the chance to introduce with Elijah Cummings, the great Elijah Cummings, one of the consciences of our Congress, along with John Lewis, who we lost this past Congress, both of them. And the PrEP Act is about education. And I'm a former teacher, so it really appealed to me. And I was honored when he allowed me to work with him on this bill. And I'll continue to push for it now in his memory and in his honor. We know that educational opportunities make all the difference. The legislation will ensure that incarcerated people receive education so they can successfully re-enter communities instead of just being dropped in and, good luck to you, but by providing resources for education. So what it would do is it would establish an Office of Correctional Education. Wouldn't that be a smart thing for us to be doing?
Amen.
Yeah, within the Bureau of Prisons, an Office of Correctional Education. That's the direction we need to be going in. It establishes the federal correctional educational program instead of a patchwork of what systems do better and what do not. It trains and assists state and local correctional institutions, and it would notify, importantly, veterans of their eligibility. So it's, I think, a hopeful, positive direction to go. I hope we can move in those directions, and I'd love to partner with you on all of that to break the cycle of failure of treatment, punishment without hope, frankly, and the cycle of recidivism. If you don't mind, I'll end on a story about my son. And it has to do with your neighboring city, Philadelphia. Governor, you remember in September of 2015, Pope Francis visited Philadelphia.
Sure.
I watched with
I couldn't get a ticket.
Well, I'm sorry. You should have called me. I was a little state representative. And I volunteered. I did whatever I could. And when I saw his agenda, the important place he visited. He chose to visit a prison. He went to Curran Fromhold Prison in Philadelphia. And so I was so excited, and I was working with the organizers, and I said, is there any chance I will hold the door open? I will do whatever it takes to visit with the Pope in prison in September of 15. And the organizer said, oh no, this is really intimate. It's for the inmates' families, and it's just a very few people. In any event, I called her and I said, you know what? I'm connected to this because my son volunteers at a prison for inmates suffering from addiction. Unbeknownst to me, that's the prison he was volunteering at. And so the organizer said, wow, that's amazing. Sure, you can go. That's a really amazing story. I called my son. I said, you're not gonna believe it. I get to go to this prison. And I said, where do you volunteer, by the way? He goes, Curran Fromhold. I said, that's it. Long story short, he got to go with me. And we had the chance to listen to the Pope's words to those inmates. And I thought I would end on those words, if you don't mind. He began his homily by thanking the inmates for receiving him and speaking about why he had come. And he said, and I quote, any society, any family which cannot share or take seriously the pain of its children and views that pain as something normal or to be expected is a society condemned to remain a hostage to itself, prey to the very things which cause that pain. The Pope preached to us that life means getting our feet dirty. Sometimes we take the wrong path. like the inmates gathered in that room. But he taught that Jesus wants to wash us clean, to heal us of our wounds, no matter where life has taken us. He said, and I quote, "Jesus comes to save us from the lie that says no one can change, the lie of thinking that no one can change." Of course, he offered those words for the inmate, but I know they were meant for all of us. So I thank you for the work that you do to say that you are going to get rid of the lie that no one can change, or that the pain of our children incarcerated or struggling with mental illness or struggling with substance abuse disorder cannot be changed. We can't ignore that pain. We have to do better. So I thank you, Governor McCreevy, for having me today.
You blow me away. I just want to thank the Congresswoman. I want to thank her for her testimony. I want to thank her what she's doing on mental health and policing, what she's doing on employment and veterans. My dear friend, Senator Sandra Cunningham, her late husband was in the Marine Corps. And obviously we're grappling with a lot of issues of veteran suicide, and my friend Bob Luby and Rich Liebler. So I just want to say thank you. But on mental health, on employment and corrections, go figure. A correctional department that's going to focus on getting people training and work skills. We have to fight every day to bring about these changes so that we can see this manifested in our lives. So to Congresswoman, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Have a blessed Easter. I mean, you can't top, for me, you can't top Pope Francis. And to Madeleine, boy, I got the morning phone call. You've got to listen to this Congresswoman. She's great. Thank you both. Godspeed.
Thank you, Governor. It's been an honor to be with you. And the best to the rest of your panel. You have just a star-studded panel. Say hello to
we have Van Jones and my dear brother-in-arms, Reverend Steffi Bartley of the National Action Network. So thank you so much, and thank you for your courage.
And I'll partner with you any day of the week.
Thank you.
Okay.
God bless. Happy
Thank you.
Easter.
Happy Easter. Same to you. God bless you.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Congresswoman. Whew, that was powerful.